everybody, welcome to Kiwi Bird's Corner. Today I'm going to be reviewing and going through all the books that I read in January. I'm going to be going through all the books that I read in January, especially all the new genres that I read, all the new books that I've read, and I've been reading a little bit for book competition too. And I'm also going to be showing a little bit of my book journal and my book reading goals for this new year of 2025. So I decided that my reading goal this year was going to be 100 books because I've never really done something. I've never done like a actual reading goal or counted how many books I've read in a year before. So I decided to start with 100 because that seemed kind of like a reachable goal, and I didn't know how many books I would actually read in a year. But in January, I read 11 books, especially as I was reading for a book competition, and so that counted for a lot of the books in the end. But I'm just going to be taking you through some of the books that I read and what rating I gave these books, if I liked them, or if I would recommend them to you. So the first book I read in January was Wuthering Heights, and I gave this one 3.5 stars because I did really like it and I did really enjoy reading it. I felt like the reading did fly by even though it was a kind of a longer book. But I also felt that it was a little bit strange. It was definitely a lot more different than any of the other classic books I've ever read. So if you haven't read any classics or haven't read many classics yet, then I would not recommend that. But if you have read many classics, then I think Wuthering Heights would be good. It's told from the point of view of a housekeeper, like most of the time, and then some of the time there is like this man that's kind of like an outsider learning about this like history, and almost the whole time it's about like a family's past or like a person's past, and so that's really interesting. I think it was interesting in a way where if you knew the whole plot beforehand, you wouldn't think it's very interesting, but the author makes it interesting and impressively puts a lot of words and chapters and pages into something that you think would actually take that long of writing. But yeah, so I gave that 3.5 stars, just kind of in the middle. Not my favorite, but also it was a pretty enjoyable read. The second book that I read in January was Children of the River by Linda Crew, and I gave this one 4 stars because I really enjoyed reading it, and I felt like she made the characters really strong, gave them a little bit of background, but also made the characters strong without having a ton of background, which I think can be hard to do sometimes, because just like made the characters relatable, you wanted to see the characters succeed, and you felt really empathetic towards them, I guess, and that made it really nice. It was a historical fiction, so it was, well, kind of historical fiction, kind of realistic fiction, a mixture, which I never really read something like that before, because it's set from not too long ago, but it is more like a historical fiction. But you can still relate to some of the characters' experiences, I would say. Then the third book that I read in January was Seven Sons and Seven Daughters, and I gave this one 2 stars. It was kind of a book that was just sitting on my shelf, and it was historical fiction, and I thought it was okay. It flew by fairly fast, but it just wasn't really that interesting. I feel like maybe just not the type of book for me, and then the plot wasn't that interesting, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But yeah, the writing style was okay, and so it flew by. The fourth book that I read in January is Spells for Lost Things, and I gave this one 3 stars because it does have like a nice plot, like a nice fantasy plot, and some of the characters, I found some of their phrases to like really hit and and some of the phrases were just really funny, and then there was some of those like little parts that I'm like, oh yeah, I really like that. But then there was some parts where like the characters just felt a little too shallow, and I didn't feel as engaged with them as I would like. And so yeah, this book just didn't really do it for me, but otherwise I did like the idea of the book. I felt like that was cool. kind of like the magic, like kind of a mixture between fantasy and realistic fiction almost. Then the fifth book that I read in January was Animals of Farthing Wood. And this book I was actually reading for a book competition, which is happening in February, just like early February. So I needed to get a lot of reading done beforehand for this one. And I gave this one 2 stars. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't my favorite either. It was about, yeah, it's kind of just about animals, like that they have to flee their home. And I thought it was interesting enough to keep me hooked throughout, but not really something I would recommend or really want to read again or think about as much afterwards. So yeah, I just gave that one 2 stars. Then the sixth book that I read in January was also for the book competition, and I read a couple books this month that were for the book competition, so you're going to be hearing about that. But this one was The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, and I gave this one 3 stars because I did really like some of the parts, and this was actually a reread because I was trying to reread leading up to the competition, but I just decided to add it because, yeah, getting through all these books felt like they deserve to be on here. And I think I am going to put rereads on here because it just counts as reading even if I am not reading new books. But I'm just going to put rereads on there. And yeah, I gave this one 3 stars because I really do enjoy a lot of parts of it. It's like really funny because it's about like an 11-year-old girl that's like really good at chemistry and loves poisons, and like she's solving a mystery, and it's really funny. And I think the story and the plot is really well done too. But also, I felt like it was a little hard to get through sometimes. Especially the second time around, maybe not so much the first time, but some of the phrases were like, I think it's a British book, but some of the phrases were, I don't know, just a little hard to get through, and just made it seem like reading it was more like a march, I guess, or trying to push against a wall. But not too much of that, so I did really like it and I would recommend it. But I have read a lot of well, maybe not a lot, but British books before, and I just haven't felt like I've had as much trouble with some of the phrases and some of the language, especially reading classics. I feel like I haven't had that much trouble either, so I don't know why I was having a little trouble with this one, but yeah, I just did. And then the seventh book that I was reading in January was Snow Falling in Spring, and this one is about a girl living in China during the Cultural Revolution, so it's really interesting to see. And yeah, it's nonfiction and a autobiography, I believe. So I gave it 3 stars because, again, I really liked it, but I'm not sure if I would if I would recommend it as a top book. And 3 stars is pretty solid too, but I'm not sure if in the future I would really want to read it again, or like, for instance, The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie is a series. I don't feel like I need to continue the series, if that makes sense. It's just, kind of in the middle. But I felt that Snow Falling in Spring had some really good accounts of the experiences, and it was a really nice read, so I would recommend that one, but it wasn't my favorite ever. So the 8th book that I read in January, which is actually the highest rated book this month, was It's Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, which I gave 4.5 stars. And this one, as well as Snow Falling in Spring, was actually for the competition as well. And I just really like this one because it was a nonfiction and it was an autobiography, but it was written so well and just had like these moments and stories that was really entertaining to read. But also the author, Trevor Noah, conveyed like the point and the message really well. I felt affected by the message, and you kind of felt the weight of the message, but also there's like these funny moments, these stories, and it kind of added all into this really nice story, and I really did like that. Maybe not quite a 5 stars because I just think it's not maybe quite the type of book for me. I think with a lot of other people it might be a 5 stars, but just simply wasn't just didn't quite hit that spot for me, but I did really enjoy it, so I gave it 4.5 stars. So the ninth book that I read was A Beautiful Lie, and I only gave this 1 star. Unfortunately, it was really not that good. I read it as a book that had been sitting on my shelf for a while, and I actually picked this one up a little bit earlier in the year, and then I put it back down because I didn't really like it. The thing that really made this book 1 star for me was the fact that I was really confused about what was happening in the book the entire time. I kind of thought it was something different, and I didn't really know what was happening. And when I came to the end of the book, there was a little note up by the author about what was happening, and I was like, oh, so that's what's happening. And the fact that I did not know that the entire book was kind of astounding. And I don't know if that's just me not noticing things, but also it was not very clear at all. And that really ruined the book for me. And then also, I feel like in another person's hands, it could have been a little bit better. I mean, I'm sure people could love this book, and maybe I just personally didn't like it, but I felt like the dialogue was not really realistic or something that the characters would actually say sometimes. And though I was able to read the book easily and it did flow a little, it didn't really feel like the text was just really equipped for the plot, if you know what I'm saying. I felt like it should have been written a bit differently, and it would have been much more enjoyable. So yeah, that's just my opinion on that. Then the 10th book I read this month was Escape Across the Wide Sea, which I also had as 1 star. And this again was a historical fiction, just like A Beautiful Lie, that was sitting on my shelf for a long time and I read. And it did have some good parts, but I feel like one thing with some of these historical fictions is that the dialogue is just not, I don't know, it seems a bit shallow for the characters, not really equipped for the plot or the story. And then we didn't get a lot of information in Escape Across the Wide Sea, and it just wasn't as fully rounded, I guess I would say, as I would like, and just wasn't a very enjoyable reading experience. But I did know what was going on. So yeah, that was just my opinion on that. So the 11th book that I read this month is The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, which was also for the book competition. And I give this one 3.5 stars because this was a reread. And when I read it the first time, I felt like it did not flow that much. But when I read it again, I felt like it actually flowed a lot more, and I was able to go through it really quickly. Because I started this on a Thursday, and the competition was on a weekend, past weekend, and I read it on Thursday and I read it on Friday, and I had almost finished it and I hadn't quite finished it, and then on the 1st of February I finished it. So I decided to count it in the January books because on the 1st of February it was like a couple pages and then I was done with it. So basically I just read it in all of January, and I felt like it just flowed and went really easy. Maybe because I was in reading mode and I was like, I need to read this, I need to, read a lot. But it just felt like I was just reading it in the blink of an eye, and I'm not really sure why, because the first time it felt a lot slower, but maybe it was just necessity that I was reading it really quickly. But I feel like it does have a lot of good parts to it, and I do really like the ending in particular. But there's also some parts that just don't really hit for me, and it's maybe not my favorite genre or my favorite type of book. It's historical fiction, which I've been reading a lot of historical fiction and autobiographies this month, which I kind of didn't really think I didn't have that goal to do that, but I did anyway. And yeah, it was okay. I would recommend it if you like historical fiction. I think that's really nice. It's a really nice one for that one, but maybe didn't quite do it all for me, but 3.5 stars is a solid rating anyway. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe because it costs absolutely nothing to you. All you have to do is click a button, and it would really make my day. So thank you so much. Bye.